I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask a question to each one and have them introduce themselves. I'm Julia Angwin. I'm a longtime tech investigative journalist. I have a small nonprofit newsroom called Proof News that spent the past year investigating AI and how accurate it was in responding to election and related queries. What do you think the answer was? Not so good. Not accurate. And I also write for the New York Times opinion section, where I often weigh in about thoughts about AI as well. And if you want to know where I stand on hype, I think I did a piece last year titled AI is overhyped. So, in full transparency. So I'm going to start with Arvind, because actually Arvind is the barometer for whether AI is hyped or overhyped or underhyped. He is a professor at Princeton. I'm going to let him describe himself, but I'm going to say that his blog, Substack, AI Snake Oil, and his book, AI Snake Oil, are literally required reading if you want to know anything about AI. So you're in the hands of a master. So I'm going to start with Arvind. Introduce yourself and tell us what AI is good at and what it's bad at.
Sure. Thank you for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I've had the good fortune to be in many nice rooms, but this is the first time with a view of boats, so that's very nice. Yeah, my name is Arvind Narayanan. I'm a computer science professor at Princeton University, director of the Center for Information Technology Policy. I love that I'm sitting here with Julia because my journey of what AI is good and bad at actually goes all the way back to Julia's work back in 2016, the machine bias investigation at ProPublica, which I'm sure most of us have heard of, with criminal justice risk prediction algorithms having dramatically different rates of failure for black defendants and white defendants. Super important investigation. One thread there in that investigation that I thought was not picked up on enough was that, yes, there was a big racial disparity, but ultimately these algorithms didn't work that well for anyone, right, regardless of which group they were in. And if the majority of people who are flagged as high risk by AI for committing a crime, when you look at the data, the fact that they don't actually go on to commit a crime, right? They might be maybe higher risk than other folks, but these are pretty noisy assessments, and the fact that we're making incredibly consequential decisions about people's lives, right? Pretrial detention, that they might have to be jailed for months or years until their trial, that seemed like something is going fundamentally wrong in addition to the issue of bias. And I started thinking about and talking about, okay, what are the things that AI is being used for that it's actually fundamentally not able to do? And I figured this is one of them. And then I started looking at AI in hiring, where the conceit is that you have this interview with AI and it's going to predict if you're going to be a good job candidate. And we saw this pattern with my co-author Sayash Kapoor over and over in so many different sectors, and people hadn't really connected the dots, which is that anytime we use AI to make decisions about people in criminal justice and education and healthcare and hiring based on a prediction of what they will do in the future or what will happen to them in the future, those decisions are only slightly more accurate than the flip of a coin, even with the best AI that we have, even if we have data sets with millions of people in it, because it's not fundamentally a technical problem. It's just fundamentally a consequence of the fact that the future is hard to predict. Right, so that is one of the main theses of our book, AI Snake Oil, that in these predictive tasks it doesn't do well. And just to complete the other part of your question, what is it good at? I do think while generative AI is in many ways overhyped, it is an area when you look at the computer science, there has been genuine, remarkable technical progress over the last 10 years. The capability improvements have been rapid. The big problem I have with the industry is that they haven't put enough guardrails around the technology, like the work that Julia was describing. The simple measure of saying, no, I can't answer election questions for you, right? Go look at official websites. To do that took pushing from journalists and civil society and so forth. So this is the kind of reason why I think generative AI has been overhyped, but in terms of the fundamental capabilities, I do think it's a remarkable technology. The way I would put it is the hype is over here, the actual adoption of the technology over here, and the capabilities are somewhere in the middle. So I do think there is quite a gap between where the capabilities are and the extent to which people and industries and organizations have figured out how to actually take advantage of those capabilities.
Well, thank you, Arvind. I do appreciate you mentioning my work from 2016, Machine Bias 8. I do want to mention that I'm going to do this year a 10-year retrospective because the really tragic thing is that I proved that this algorithm was biased against black defendants, and it's one of the weirdest things that's ever happened in my career. It is most cited paper, more cited than anything my husband, who is an actual professor, has written. And it has made a huge transformation in the computer science field. It has made absolutely zero impact in the criminal legal system. These algorithms are still used. And I think it's a really interesting question about what does it take to get impact and what are the fundamental barriers to that. So I'm going to be re-examining this year because I just have never had an experience like that as a journalist where it's like totally revolutionary and nothing at all changed.
I realize I'm breaking your flow here, but I have to say there's been tremendous impact. It opened an entire field. I could not do my work. I know you're about to introduce me. The reason I can do my work is because of that study. People talked in theory about harms from AI, and half the world is not adopting it, but the other half is adopting it with full abandon. And it is that story, it is the Reuters story that brought out the hiring it algorithm problem. It is the academic researchers. It is a few fundamental stories that opened, and yours was the first, where none of us would have been able to demonstrate there's a meaningful cause for governance if it was not. So I just have to counter that it's an entire field of responsible AI governance, now called AI governance, exists because of that study.
Well, thank you. I just wish that it wasn't being used in the criminal setting. It's upsetting. But anyways, Miriam, thank you for jumping in, and please introduce yourself. And also, I wanted, since your organization really focuses on humans and how they use the AI, I was hoping you could explain how do humans understand AI and what is missing there.
Thank you for that interesting question. So I'm Miriam Vogel. I run EqualAI for about 6.5 years, and explaining to people why I was interested in AI adoption and risks 6.5 years ago was a little harder than it is now. It's now something hopefully most all of us are familiar with, but in terms of how humans are using it, if you wouldn't mind raising your hands one more time, how many of you have used AI today? Today. And I think everyone who's not raising their hand actually should be. That's the interesting thing is so many people are engaged in AI on a daily, hourly basis, whether it's their news feed, whether it's the Zoom call, whether it's Spotify playlists. It's integrated in our GPS. I don't go anywhere without Waze. I don't, I go my routine route, just seeing how I can save a few minutes and avoid traffic patterns. It's integrated in our daily life, and we have two problems here. We have companies that have gone from 50% to 72% adoption, according to some recent studies, in using AI. And then we have the governance side. Who is mining the shop? We learned the hard way, if you did not have a cybersecurity plan in place 20 years ago, it's too late when you have an attack. Anyone who did not have a cybersecurity plan in place, whether they were a large or small corporation, an organization, you're not immune from a cybersecurity attack. Same with AI governance. If you do not have a plan in place on how to address the risks, you're putting yourselves at liability, risks, harms, making sure that you want to make sure your consumers are adopting and can trust you. You want to make sure there's no ProPublica stories, Reuters, otherwise of how you've been harming people. How are you going to win back that trust if you've lost it? And if that is not enough incentive, there's litigation. There's been a 6.5 times increase in cases in the US alone in over a 6-year period. So I have a very complicated message. Humans are in some ways not using it enough. Companies are using it a lot, and we need to bridge that gap with AI literacy so that we all understand how AI can benefit us, how we can get ahead by using these tools, but that has to include understanding the risks.
And Luke, thank you for jumping in at the last minute to join our panel. And I wanted to ask you about corporate control of AI. So, for a long time, most of my career as a tech reporter, AI was like a research avocation in academia. and it's burst into the commercial scene. And I think there's a real question right now among a lot of people whether it is a good thing or too early to be out there in the wild when it's like the quality isn't quite there. So at least on some things, on generative AI. So if you can introduce yourself and talk about the impact of commercialization.
Sure. Well, my name is Luke Hogg. I'm the Director of Technology Policy at the Foundation for American Innovation. We're a think tank based in DC. I am the least qualified person to be on this panel, and I think I kind of want to represent the techno-optimist side of this equation. So I think in terms of corporate development and use, I think it's a double-edged sword. I've been critical of corporate control over speech platforms, over kind of the infrastructure on which the vast majority of our world now runs. However, it's really freaking expensive to build and develop some of these tools. So, I think that, as I said, it's a double-edged sword, and what we're seeing is actually a movement towards more openness. I think it was Perplexity just recently open sourced their model weights, and OpenAI's corporate model is really weird and sketchy. But I think that a lot of the people that are going and building and developing these technologies do see them as a boon for society, and do see them as kind of a public good. And at the end of the day, we haven't really figured out the business model that is going to sustain this. I think with the title of the panel, it's been interesting, right? Is it underhyped or is it overhyped? It's hard to look at NVIDIA's market cap and say that it's overhyped. But if we're looking over the course of 10 years and what the development of this technology can do, I think that we're looking at a dramatic boon, not only for economically for the companies that are actually developing these technologies, but also kind of across the economy. So I don't think I clearly answered that question. I kind of talked around it, but I think corporate control is a concern, but it's a concern that we're already dealing with in a lot of other ways, and there's certainly ways that we can manage some of these risks.
Great, thank you. So I want to talk about 3 different areas because the conversation with AI in my experience is going to be really abstract and kind of like you can just get lost. So let's pick some concrete areas to focus on. So let's start with the elections, right? So last year, we had more elections around the world, high stakes elections than anywhere. I spent my year trying to understand how capable AI was of answering simple questions like where should I vote or whatever, and found endlessly disappointing answers. And you recently published sort of a retrospective of what you thought about what happened last year. What could we learn from our first year of having elections with AI involved? So tell us what you came up with.
Sure, and by the way, Julie gave me a heads up that we're going to fight about this.
Yes, we are.
And so we haven't discussed further details, so it's all going to come out now. So we looked at the claimed and actual impact of AI on elections, and since there was a wave of elections around the world in 2024, it was a good opportunity to look at it. Fortunately for us, Wired had collected a data set of known uses of AI in elections, especially concerning uses. There were about 80 of them, so we did an analysis. And it looks like this breaks down into a few different categories. The first one, this is the classic thing that a lot of people worry about, is you could have these AI bots that are swaying people's opinions, propaganda on a massive scale, election interference, that kind of thing. The second category is a more subtle kind of use. This is not by threat actors, foreign influence, but actually people who are campaigning for doing things like, cartoon images of themselves to make them look cooler, right? It's, this is very different from the kind of election interference kind of concern, right? But this is another kind of use that we see. And then just looking at my notes here, there were a couple of other ones. Julia's concern, of course, of people asking questions to these AI bots and getting wrong answers. That is definitely a very significant concern. And then there's the general worry that it's going to degrade the information environment. We don't know what's true and what's not. And this is going to be bad for democracy. It could lead to democratic backsliding. So we looked at these concerns. When we look at the data, the kind of acute concern about this is a particular propaganda effort, this changed people's minds, this was a piece of AI-generated misinformation that went viral and it had this kind of impact on the election, that is close to non-existent, I would say. We have the numbers in our essay, but that is pretty rare. What is much more common is the kind of AI for propaganda. There were some beneficial uses of AI. A candidate who had lost his voice used AI in order to be able to recreate that voice when talking to people. And then there were some uses that it's hard to categorize as good or bad. So people, especially in countries like India, where there are 114 official languages and over 1,000 unofficial ones, candidates find it very useful to tailor their messages in different languages for local populations, especially when they don't speak most of those languages. So we found this rather nuanced picture, and we didn't find much evidence for the specific claim that AI-generated misinformation is going to change people's minds and allow threat actors to influence elections. And so I do think this is a topic we should be concerned about, but it's not in the particular way that it's been portrayed. And I think the solutions we're going to come up with are going to be much more subtle than saying we have to ban this kind of AI behavior.
Yeah, so here's our fight. So I read that and I thought, my basic feeling was, you're right, we sort of had this idea of there was going to be this catastrophic event where there'd be like a video showing one of the candidates doing something that they didn't do. And there were videos like that, but mostly they were caught and debunked. And there weren't as many, I think, as we expected to see. And actually what there was way, way, way more of is just a traditional misinformation, which traditionally it's a little bit of truth that is presented out of context, right? And that you don't really need AI for. But I would say that I disagreed with this general idea that it wasn't harmful, because my assessment was that people we don't know how often they ask AI chatbots questions because there's no data available on usage. But assuming anyone asked anything, the accuracy rate of responses was extremely low. And throughout the year, I tested continuously throughout the year during the election, and it really continued to be bad throughout. And I think there's a sort of a risk of the banality of evil, which is we didn't see the catastrophic events, but the general thing that a thing that's out there that we're all agreeing to call intelligence is actually constantly giving you inaccurate information is actually, to me, incredibly dangerous. It degrades our ability to trust anything. It degrades our ability to actually just find real information. We're seeing that now more often with people using these chat search engines. Apple had to pull Apple Intelligence because it was actually summarizing news incorrectly. So I think that still is a harm, and that's sort of why I wanted to fight with you about it.
No, totally with you on that. Yeah.
Oh, well, so much for that fight.
And then on top of it, there's the biggest voter mobilizing force of TikTok, where some of it's disinformation, some of it is accurate, but it's the flooding. It's using AI and algorithms to flood people's minds, eyes, time of various ages, regions, that I think probably I'd love for you all to prove it, but I mean, talking with numerous different constituencies, particularly the young people, it flooded their eyeballs.
Yeah, I mean, so much so that we passed a law to ban it, and then decide not to enforce it, which is cool. I thought another arena that we could talk about is work, right? We were told AI was going to take all our jobs. So far, actually, it doesn't seem like it is. But it is being forced into the workflow, right? So more what we're seeing instead of job loss is job transformation, where all of a sudden you have an AI, first of all, all of you have this experience I have, which is it's in my Google Doc talking to me, go away, So that's annoying. And it's in Microsoft, it's in there. And then in a lot of workplaces, there are little chatbots that might tell people what to do. And so I'm wondering, Miriam, if you can talk about what are we seeing with whether that effort to push it into the workflow, you sounds like you're bullish about it, but it also seems like we don't know how effective that is. And is it making people's jobs easier or harder?
I think right now we are at it's too hard to tell right now. I think there's so little adoption. I think it is in many workforces. I think companies are investing in it. And if you're talking about, it depends on the industry and it depends where in the company you're talking about. The marketing teams are using it. The hiring teams are using it. If I ever talk to a company that tells me they're not using AI, I say, talk to your HR department. They're using it. Marketing and for sure. In numerous different operations, it's being used at scale. But for most of us, it's available and, as you say, being ignored consciously or unconsciously. You don't realize it's there. So I think that right now we're at a place where companies are bullish on it, but we're in a place where, based on our own hesitation, based on reasonable concerns, we understand there are risks. We don't want to be replaced, or we just don't understand it. For all those reasons, I think the workforce is not broadly adopting it, but I do think that it was best said that AI is not going to replace workers or people en masse. It is people who use AI who are going to be doing the replacing. And so I think that there is an urgent need for more of us to be curious, to see all the ways that it can use and benefit our work. How to use it safely. I mean, you need both. You need to try it, but you also have to understand, that we all know not to put personal information in a large language model. We all know that, but that is not clear to a new person young person who's new to the internet. So making sure we have alignment on what AI literacy is, how to use it, where the opportunities are, how to start a first draft, how to make your writing more concise. But to make sure to check it. It's not just the one lawyer in New York who has submitted the chat-driven motion without reading it. We have at least 6 different types of cases from numerous attorneys that have submitted motions without reading them. So it's that balance of understanding where the efficiencies are, but keeping the humans in the loop. So the good news is I don't think we're going out of business, but the bad news is we do have to engage, or good news.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to distinguish between kind of information industries and kind of other industries, right? The impact that AI is having on a steelworker in Pennsylvania is very different from me working at a think tank sitting in Washington, D.C. And anecdotally, so we've done a lot of work around Congress, like literally the staff members that are sitting behind the desks that answer the phones and deal with the day-to-day management of Congress. And what we found is that one, that AI is rapidly proliferating throughout the legislature and legislatures, and the efficiency gains that we're getting from that are actually incredible, because what we've seen from the staff that we've been working with to try and get them to use AI, trying to teach them how to use AI safely and make sure that they're not creating more problems for their office and for their member. But what we've seen is that the tasks that they're using AI for are the tasks that they don't want to do and that take up the amount of time that they could be using on more beneficial things, right? So you're talking about legislative staffers that really want to spend their time developing expertise in policy areas, that want to learn about what the latest research is, but they're having to spend their time on administrative tasks, as we all have to do. And so the more that we can allow these systems to take away some of the drudgery, we can allow, and I think across in many information industries, you're increasing the efficiency of those people and allowing them to actually do their jobs better. So I think you make a good point that essentially what we're seeing right now is the comparison of and I think statistically, the people that are using AI in their workflows are being more efficient than the people that aren't using it. So, as a macroeconomic factor, I think using AI increases the efficiency of all these information industries. And I think we should be encouraging people to proliferate it not only throughout the commercial sector, but also like throughout government, because it increases the efficiency of what kind of all of these industries.
Yeah.
Can I add a quick couple points? So one rule of thumb that comes from economists that I find very helpful for thinking about the impacts of AI on jobs is just this. Jobs are bundles of tasks, and AI automates tasks, not jobs. Any typical job, any complex job is going to be a bundle, if you will, of, 20 or 30 tasks. And at any given moment in time, AI is going to be able to automate a few of those tasks. And what we're seeing is most of the time there's enough flexibility for workers to take advantage of that, to augment their work, and to kind of reframe the job definition, if you will, to focus on the things that are not yet automated and also upskill to be able to do new things that couldn't have been done before. That's good news. The bad news, though, is that in some jobs, this is much harder than in others. When we look at what that is, there could be various factors, right? Cognitive versus physical. But another factor is when you look at jobs like translation that have seen massive job losses, I think what's already happened here is even before AI hit the scene, there has been an unbundling of a complex job into individual tasks so that it can then be turned into gig work. So when you have a job that has already been unbundled in this way and you have relatively few worker protections and you have a gig model, then it becomes easier for AI to replace workers. And one last quick observation. People often think AI is such a disruptive and powerful technology, it's going to get adopted everywhere in the next 1 or 2 years. But what we know from the history of the diffusion of innovations literature is that more disruptive technologies actually take more time to be adopted across the population and across industries, because it might require various kinds of reconfiguration, retraining, changing the organizational structure of various industries. There are some great examples from the Industrial Revolution, so I think we should expect these impacts to unfold on a timescale of decades rather than months or years.
I think that's exactly right. Can't argue with that. But here's the danger. There's a study last April, the Bipartisan Policy Center did a survey of small businesses and found that on average it saved a small business 13 hours a week when they were using AI. If you're a small business, I mean, that's a full-time job that they couldn't have afforded, that they are now benefiting from. 64 to 72% increase in revenue, consumer options. Here's another piece of that, though. It looks like AI is being adopted at least twice as fast by men as by women. So if you're talking about small businesses and you're talking about owners, who is giving themselves the advantage? So the piece where we have to be very careful, you're absolutely right. If we look at history, we know it's going to take a while to enhance adoption, to see adoption, to understand what safe and broad adoption is. But we have a moment here to make sure that we create opportunity instead of a broader opportunity gap, which is the trajectory we're currently on.
I mean, it looks like I'm going to have to be the constant AI skeptic here. So let me just jump in and say that, like, I think, the gig workers who currently already work for an AI as their boss, like an Uber driver or an Amazon worker who in the warehouses, they're actually an algorithm follows them around, tells them how much they have to do, would tell you that having an AI as a boss is a nightmare. And so I do think I just want to throw into this rosy scenario that there is a very dystopian road that we are already going down. Most of us in this room probably not are probably not gig workers. However, that leads me to my next point, which is journalism is turning into the gig economy. Okay? Our jobs are being unbundled and actually made into tasks, and more journalists are starting Substacks or whatever, which is like, it sounds glamorous, but it's actually, that's gig work, right? You're getting paid and you're like tiny increments, and it's a dangerous thing because they don't have the legal protections, the institutional protections that are needed to do journalism that really challenges power. And so they're in a very dangerous situation. And also, their distribution of their work is dependent on all these AI algorithms of the social media feeds. That's how you reach your audience. And we have seen that in a moment that is just incredible, is that the companies that own those algorithms have always claimed their independence from the government, and in this particular administration have said, actually, we would like to be aligned with the government's interests. And so there's a real concern that those feeds are not going to show adversarial work, are not going to show the work that challenges the government. I'll tell you, I looked at Threads this morning, which is the Meta Twitter alternative, and you wouldn't even know that there's anyone being fired in DC, right? And so I think that this is a journalism conference, so I wonder if any of you want to mention, because there's a lot of hype about how AI is going to help journalism. And I will tell you, as someone who is a journalist and writes words for a living, the last thing I want to do is hand that off to a machine that might make a mistake that I'm then liable for. But what do we see for journalism? Does anyone want to jump in?
I mean, I think it just gets back to the core point that AI shouldn't be replacing people in most situations, and certainly not in journalism. I think it can help with a first draft. It can help turn around words into more concise term. It can help translate quickly so that it can broaden your audience. It's about putting in guardrails in place, and it's about AI literacy. AI literacy is understanding the opportunities and the risks. It is an absolute risk if it's an AI journalist or an AI journalist newsroom management situation. So I don't think what I'm saying, I don't think what I'm hearing other people saying is that AI should run free and rule the country or the empire or the enterprise. But I do think what we're saying is it can support, it has to be in that role. It can be in support of human, it can augment. It is artificial, it can artificially enhance intelligence but not replace it.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that, but I think there's two broad points that I would make. One is that I think we do ourselves a disservice if we talk about the complete acting as if all of these jobs are going to be completely automated. We're talking about what we've actually seen in the way that AI has been integrated in most information workflows, I think is as a boon, and it helps you kind of use this task, right? So if you talk about writing an article or something like that, you're not taking the human entirely out of the process. You can be making it easier and quicker and more efficient to do that process, right? The advice that I give, again, going back to the congressional staffer example, the advice we always give is treat it like an intern, right? Like it's like an intern. You're going to let it do the task, and then there still needs to be a human in that process to make sure that it's not making those mistakes. But I think the more important point, and I think that your point about specifically the algorithmic component of the distribution of news and the distribution of journalism and investigative journalism is well taken. I would push back a little bit because I would say, I mean, if we were going to complain about tech companies, kowtowing to the Trump administration, I think that they were also kowtowing in certain instances to the Biden administration, and that the issue here that we're talking about with what's going on the algorithmic side of the distribution of information is really an issue of kind of corporate power. It's not necessarily a problem of AI. I think this is a problem of the way that we've allowed corporations to control the flow of information to individuals. In some instances, AI can make that better. In some instances, AI can make it worse. But the solutions for that problem, I don't think are solutions that are tailored at the algorithm, right? The algorithm just does what you kind of tell it to. The issue, in my opinion, is more about who's behind the algorithm and what their incentives are and how they want to use the power and control that they have over the information environment.
Let me pick up on the corporate PowerPoint. So there's two broad ways we can look at AI in journalism. One is AI used by individual journalists, and the other is what is the impact of the AI industry and the internet before it on journalism structurally. And you were alluding to that, and I think you're talking about that as well. I do think there are a lot of structural impacts. I think a lot of them have been negative, unfortunately, and one particular negative one that's happening a lot right now that I think doesn't get talked about enough is this wave of content deals between AI companies and news publishers. So these are arrangements by which an AI company has a deal, perhaps an exclusive one, to be able to show content from a publisher in the chatbot responses. These are more significant than I think we're taking them right now, because it appears likely that AI companies are training a new generation of people to expect chatbots to be the default interface to information. Chatbots to be the way by which you will access news or really anything else. So these are going to be intermediaries with much more power than they have now. And in the light of that, when you look at these content deals, these deals are being made between companies, the publisher on the one hand, AI company on the other hand, that vary in orders of magnitude in their market cap. And more than that, if you don't come to agreeable terms, it's not costly for the AI company to walk away with that deal because there are so many other publishers. It's very costly for the publisher to walk away from that deal because there are relatively few chatbots that are going to be the intermediaries. And so the lack of collective bargaining among publishers, as far as I know, there's not much collective bargaining, means that these deals are being done from a position of great disadvantage.
I call those deals, I don't even call them deals. You know what they are? So what happens is they've scraped all your content and fed it into their AI. And then you come to them and say, hey, you took all my content. and then this supposed deal happens. This is like they stole your car already. They're not giving you back the car, and they're giving you $5,000 to make you go away. This is reparations, right? These are not deals. And these are not reparations that you have control over, right? If they want to give you 5,000, they want to give you 10,000. Either way, they got your car. And so that is not a real business deal. And it is, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. And we do want to open it for questions. So start raising hands. I don't know who's coming around with and getting in line. But thank you for letting me rant about that. I had forgotten to be mad about it. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I'm a public library director. Journalism and journalists and librarians are aligned in many, many ways. And the panel and many members of the audience may not know that the Knight Foundation holds a Library Leaders Conference the day before the media forum. And AI was a topic that dominated our conversations. In thinking about the comments that I heard today about AI literacy, and in the context of knowing that there are more than 17,000 public library buildings alone in the country, first of all, if you had been able to attend the Library Leaders Conference, what kinds of things would you have said to the library leaders in the room? And secondly, what would you recommend for public libraries in particular across the country to be looking at in terms of AI literacy, but also in terms of our existence?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. Thank you. I think it's the biggest opportunity we can think of. It's such an organic, natural connection, teaching AI literacy in public libraries. If you look at our schools, our next generation, 58% of teachers in a recent Ed Week study reported that they'd never had any exposure to AI education, how to teach AI to our next generation. And those who had been one course for the most part. The majority had been exposed to. And so we have so many populations that are absolutely critical to making sure. Here's another piece with AI. Not only do we need to make sure that more people are thriving from AI, but AI cannot thrive if more of us are not using it. It's iterative. It trains based on what we're feeding it. And so if we're not using it, it is not learning how to serve you, how to benefit you. It's only benefiting from the homogenous group that is using it. So I think libraries are the key to so much of this AI literacy. I can tell you a personal bias, a way that we've been taking advantage. My daughter started a program. She was really having fun teaching my parents and my husband's parents how to use their iPhone. And so her AI literacy was really iPhone literacy. And she realized just a few applications brought so much opportunity, to be able to take an Uber to my mother-in-law who can't drive, to be able to get groceries when she was ill through DoorDash and Uber Eats, et cetera, Instacart. So she decided that this was something she wanted to make more broad. She started this program in her high school to start working with senior homes in the area, and now she's working with libraries because you have this group of high school students who are digital natives. It is so easy for them. They have to do volunteer hours, and there are public libraries in all of our communities. It's this natural relationship. The other piece is how much fun they're both having. Obviously for the seniors who get to benefit from these new uses of this tool that a lot of them really hated. They were so mad at it. They can't see it. They can't figure it out. Once they became more acquainted with it, they were properly introduced, and they realized the opportunities that it could help them with. It was really empowering. But the other piece is how much it benefited my daughter and her friends. To be able to teach, when you're a teenager, everyone's talking at you and telling you what to do. For them to realize how much value they can add to these people who they didn't know, I think I'd love to talk with you more. I think this is such an important resource, and I'm so glad you asked.
I think we should try to get one more question. Is there one over here? Yeah. Oh, hello again.
We're friends. The compound question. One, why is efficiency the goal, especially if we're talking about us as humans? Especially in journalism and storytelling, if that's the goal, then I think we've already lost. And I would like to ask you about the value of human data right? You just said, for example, libraries, all this data. Well, these companies are the only ones so far who have benefited, and the only resource for their AI systems that they don't have to pay for is data, right? They have to pay for the energy, they have to pay for the talent, for the chips, for the compute, all of that, except for data. And in none of these discussions did we hear about ethical and responsible and safe AI looking upstream to the data providers and what's happening to those jobs and human creativity. So I'd also love to hear, I loved your book, AI Snake Oil. What do you think happens if we just start integrating generative AI into all of our informational and expressive activities? We're gonna become, what does that do to the underlying models? And then we haven't heard about the environmental impacts. And what do you think about putting in a label on all of these like fun, like let's make a memoji, how many gallons of water did that cost? And how does that fit into the efficiency issue?
Sure. There's a lot there. So I think on the efficiency mechanism, like I think if we're thinking economically and macroeconomically, like efficiency, in the society, okay. In information, I think you have to distinguish between information industries and not. And essentially, we're in a marketplace, and the more efficient people are going to win out. And I think this is what we've seen across a lot of different aspects. I think efficiency is not the only goal, but it is ultimately a goal. It is a goal that we should be trying to achieve, because I think economically, it is important on the global stage and even domestically for us to compete with each other in information, and especially in corporate environments as well. I don't know. What was the middle question? I think that we need better data protection laws, right? Like part of the reason that this was able to happen in the first place and this information was able to be scraped was because the United States doesn't have a strong data protection regime.
Yeah, thank you for the question on data. That is something that's very much top of mind for us. We talk about it a lot in the book, and I was saying earlier about how these market-based solutions are not working, and I didn't get to it, but what we have recommended in our writing is that this should be seen in terms of the industries and the applications that are affected, which is journalism, arts, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the solutions have to be pretty bold and structural. I think solutions at the level of data protection are a good start, but ultimately, if you're going to start with those data protections and leave it up to the market to negotiate, that negotiation is going to happen with a very heavy power asymmetry. I think we have to be looking at interventions at the level of taxing AI companies and use that to fund journalism, fund the arts, and so forth. I know that right now the political will is not there to consider those types of things, but I think that's what we should be advocating toward in the long run.
And the other twist is, I think mostly when we're talking about those types of taxes and regulations, we're talking about foundation model companies. And I think it's just helpful to distinguish. I think most companies are AI companies now. And I have the privilege of working with companies who want to do AI governance. I mean, that's half of our work is AI literacy and half of it is self-governance. So there are many companies out there that are trying to figure out how to do this well. And that's, I think, a place where journalists have been key and where the broader public awareness is huge, because the more that you're asking for it, the more the lawyers are bringing lawsuits, the more the journalists are writing stories, the more we're demanding it of the internal governance, which is separate and aside from regulations, but just as powerful in so many ways.
And given that we're not going to get any regulations, we will have to leave it at self-governance. We are at the end of our time. Everybody do good things.